Hey guys, today we're in the book of 1 Kings chapter 4. Solomon is king. He has now been given wisdom. The word of his wisdom is spreading through Israel. And now we get to see what that looks like in the real world of Israel. It starts off and it says, King Solomon was over all of Israel, which means all of Israel represented him as king. There was no sect or group of people trying to dethrone him. Everybody saw him as king and wanted him as king. And then we see his officials, and it goes through a long list of officials, and we don't have time to go through all those. A couple of things, right? Because he's wise, he realizes he needs more than himself, right? So he sets a group of people to help him lead. A couple of those people are Jehoshaphat, which was the recorder for his father David, is now the recorder for him. He did a good job. He kept him. Notice Benaiah, which was a faithful servant of David, is now a general for Solomon. And then you have Abiathar. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Abiathar, just a couple of chapters ago, was exiled by Solomon, right? He was exiled. And so here it says he's official. Doesn't mean that Solomon necessarily used him, but he was a priest. He could be exiled, but Solomon could not take away his priesthood. And so here it just says that Zadok and Abiathar were priests. And so Zadok is old. His son is now kind of the new priest for Solomon, but Zadok is still alive. He's still a priest. You are in the priesthood until you die. The same with Abiathar. Though he's been exiled, he's still a priest, but he's not necessarily a priest for David. In verse 7, we see that he picks 12 officers. We would call them today governors. He picks a governor for each tribe of Israel. And so there is one man that is responsible for the tribe of Judah, for the tribe of Benjamin, for the tribe of Simeon, right? So each little 12 sects of Israel, there's one man, and that one man comes back to Solomon. But what was his job? It says their job was to provide food for the king and his household. Now, we think it's their job to cook for him, but that's not what it means. It means it's the job of the one man, the one governor, the one official to collect taxes. Taxes were paid in the Old Testament not by money, but by food. The same as tithes. Tithes to the Lord mostly was paid by food, not by money. And so one governor, he divided these governors, and he said, okay, Judah, you're January, Benjamin, you're February, Simeon, you're March. And he goes through, Dan, you're April, right? He goes through all of them, and it's their job that they would collect for a year of all the animals and all of the grain. And in that year, they would come to Jerusalem, and they would bring the food that would feed Solomon and his palace, his kind of officials. He would feed them for a month. This was a collection of taxes. And it goes through all those. There's some cool things there, but we don't have time to get into that. But we do see in verse 20, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand of sea. This would be called the golden age of Israel. There's no problems. There's peace. There's prosperity. And man, Israel is flourishing. And so we can see how much they're flourishing by the next couple verses. Verse 22, Solomon's provisions for one day. So we get what Solomon eats. Now, this is not all what Solomon eats, okay? This is his palace, his officials, but as we read through these things, it shows us a couple of things. One, it shows us this is a whole lot of food. There's a lot of gluttony going on here, okay? Solomon is living his best life. Number two, it is written not to show how gluttonous Solomon is, but to show how prosperous Israel is, right? So even though there's a negative look at this, there is a positive look at this. And let me kind of explain some of this to you. There's 30 cores of fine flour. That's 55 gallons of flour every single day. How much bread would be made by that? That's a whole lot of bread. 10 fat oxen. When it says fat oxen, it means oxen that lived in a pen and they were fed and they were getting fat, right? They're getting marbled, okay? What we would say today. They're put in a pen, they're getting really fat. This is the best of the best meat. Not only did it take 10 fat oxen, but it also took 20 pasture-raised cattle, right? So they only ate grass, much like today. A lot of times that's what they want. That's what I want. Pasture-raised, grass-fed. They're the clean animals. So this is 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-raised cattle, 100 sheep, plus deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. When you read all of this, and Bible scholars read all of this, they say this amount of food would feed 15 to about 35,000 people. There was not 15 to 35,000 people in the palace, okay? So this shows us, for one, Israel's very prosperous, so they can afford to feed this to King Solomon every single day. This also shows us a beginning of a character flaw of King Solomon. Why would you want this much food? Why would you want this much of anything, right? And so it's starting to show a little bit of character flaw. These are all good things, right? But remember yesterday's chapter, he did what the Lord loved him, but he worshiped at high places, right? And now he's a great king, but he's a little gluttonous in everything, right? He wants the best of the best. He wants the finest of the finest, right? So it just gives us these little glimpses of kind of who Solomon really is, right? Behind the veil, who is Solomon? Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan to Beersheba, from the north to the south, and every man under his vine and under his fig tree. We see this phrase, we've seen it before, we will see it again. This is just a Hebrew proverb of saying that they're living in peace and prosperity. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. Chronicles tells us he had 4,000. So whether it's 40 or 4 really doesn't matter. This is a lot of horses. This is more horses than anybody's ever had, okay? Which once again is a good thing, but back in Deuteronomy, God tells Israel not to build up their horses. Don't put so much faith in their military. So once again, God tells them not to do this, but Solomon does this. What's amazing about this is one day, hopefully we can go to Israel together and I can take you to the place where Solomon's barns were, and you can see all of the stables that were there. You can see all of the holdout rocks where they would put water and grain for the horses. It's an amazing place. Looking out over the Megiddo Valley, it's an amazing place that is dug out today. But whether it's 40 or 4 doesn't matter. It's showing you the amount of prosperity that Israel has. Verse 29, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all, for he was wiser than other men. It just shows us that God did exactly what Solomon asked, right? God, in the last chapter, what do you want? I want wisdom, and God fulfills that. He gives him that, and it tells us that Solomon becomes the wisest man on planet Earth, and everybody is amazed at what Solomon does. He speaks over 3,000 proverbs, which is where we get the book of Proverbs. He writes 1,500 songs, not so much psalms. Those are David's kind of claim to fame, right? But he does write a lot of songs. But notice this says he speaks of trees and beasts and birds and reptiles and fish, and you're like, well, what does that have to do? His wisdom wasn't just about ruling. His wisdom wasn't just about godly things. His wisdom wasn't just about book smarts. His wisdom was about all the things of the world, including animals, including trees, horticulture, all these things. So his wisdom was not just kind of central focused, it was a widespread of focus that he truly was the wisest man of anybody, of any subject that ever walked. And all the people of the nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from the kings of the earth who had heard from his wisdom. So people all over the world is now coming to Israel to hear of Solomon, which is, in one way, it's a great thing, right? That they would come and Solomon could tell them about Yahweh and about God and about what he has. But we will see that as all the people come to Solomon, it starts to get into Solomon's head. And instead of declaring the wisdom that comes from God and pointing to God for this wisdom, he starts to point at himself. So we're just starting to see glimpses. Even though Solomon is a great man, he was a great king, but we're starting to see these little chinks of the armor, right? These little kind of places that will become his ultimate destruction. And it reminds us as we read this that a lot of times we think that we are the best, right? Our pride tells us that we are the best, but in reality we have these little problems, and Satan will find these little problems, these little holes in our armor, and he will use those to exploit them so that we would fall to the temptation of not looking to God, of not praising God, but starting to look at ourselves, right? Satan never gets us to worship him. He gets us to worship ourselves. And when we worship ourselves, God is no longer one. And it's very easy to go from ourselves to worshiping Satan, right? So it's just kind of a slow, gradual fall. And that's exactly what we're starting to see through Solomon. Hope that makes a little bit more sense. And we will see you tomorrow in chapter 5. God bless.